Sabah.
Yeah, great. I'm really pleased to be here. This is my first time in Toronto in this contest. I used to live in Frankfurt. Like the last 17 years of my life I spent in Frankfurt, and I was engaged in different kind of groups and activities and so on. So I'm new here. I am really still searching for different kind of groups and networks and practices which I would love to be engaged in. So what do we have? What is the current narrative about Iraq? First of all, we have so-called sectarian war. Second, we have a civil war. Third, we have a democratic government in Iraq. Fourth, we have so-called Islamic fundamentalists like Bin Laden, al-Zarqawi, all kind of Islamists, and international terrorism in Iraq. Fifth, we have a very humanitarian project of the United States and Great Britain in Iraq. They are doing the Iraqis a big favor. They are building states, building a nation, institution, and distributing pizzas and steaks and French fries. So I think this is the dominant presentation of the conflict in Iraq. Now, if we look at the whole situation from the Iraq perspective, it is completely different. My argument, hence, to say you cannot understand the conflict in Iraq in sectarian or civil war notions. Second, from the Iraqi perspective, we are dealing here with a class project. It is the project of the rebuilding and cementing of the old social classes in Iraq, who used to govern and rule until 1958, before the revolution. Third, we have a correlation of interest between the Bush administration and the ruling and the governing classes in Iraq. I'm not saying an identity of interest, but a correlation of interest. That means both of them, they have their own agenda. And the Iraqi government, for instance, is not merely a puppet of the Bush administration. They force their own class project in Iraq. But they rely heavily on the U.S. British occupation in Iraq to rebuild, as I said, and cement their position within the state apparatus and outside the state apparatus in Iraq. So we have a cultural presentation of the conflict of Iraq, but not a political one. I was shocked for the last 4 years. There's not even one single political analysis of the situation in Iraq. You have categories like Shiite, Sunni, Kurd, Arab, and so on. As if all of these are, political categories. By the way, I mean, if you don't know what is a Shiite, you are looking at one. I am a Shiite, born in Iraq. Okay, so being a Shiite says nothing about, what your political position is. You could be a Marxist, but also a Fascist, a Baptist, and so on. So there was not even a single political analysis. By the way, not only here in Europe, but also within Iraq or within the Middle East, which is not surprising, of course. So when I was thinking about the whole situation in Iraq, I was not only surprised by the presentation of the conflict here in Europe, but also I faced a problem 1 week before the war. I was invited in Frankfurt for a conference with part of the Iraqi exile opposition from the Democratic Party of Kurdistan of Barzani, the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan of Talabani, representatives of the Communist Party of Iraq, etc. And I was there. And all of them argued in a way as if they didn't have any political practice for the last 20 or 30 years. I mean, either they were assuming to be naive or they were naive. They were arguing basically that the United States will get rid of Saddam Hussein and then we'll take over. We will build democracy and so on. So it was not only the liberal, like somebody like Kanan Makia. I don't know if you know Kanan Makia. He used to be a Trotskyist, but now he's liberal, or neoliberal, I would say. This guy, he was really thinking about making a democratic institution in Iraq, rebuilding democracy according to the old monarchic model in Iraq. And I was thinking, those guys, they have 30 years of political experience. And when I was arguing against this, I'm saying, we will have a complex situation with all these kind of atrocities. We will have a situation which will create the basis and the grounds for all kind of violence and terror and destruction, etc. Everything but democracy. I was accused two things because they didn't know at this conference, either being a Baptist, and I was struggling against Saddam Hussein 25 years of my life, or the second thing, being a Sunni, and I'm Shia, born Iraq. So this is the dominant narrative also in Iraq now. If you are against the government, if you are against the occupation, so either you are Baptist, you are Sunni, or you are Islamic fundamentalist. Besides that, there's no possibility of being against the government as a democratic subject. They are telling me we're bringing you democracy, so I was thinking in a democratic sense, right? And I thought people, in democratic societies, they have the right to oppose the government, not to vote, etc. But I realized in Iraq something else. If you are against it, then you're terrorist. Basically, you're terrorist. So the thing is, what I'm saying is that the narrative of the sectarian and civil war is nothing but a tactic to legitimize the occupation, to present the occupation as an anti-terror forces of civilized mission, and at the same time to legitimize the governing class in Iraq by saying we were the victims of Saddam Hussein, being Shiite or Kurds, hence we have claim to power as being victims. So all of those who are against us, so either Sunnis, Baptists, or whatever, or terrorists. So there's a kind of instrumental logic here behind the narrative of sectarian and civil war. My argument is to say that violence and terror in Iraq is not a collateral issue. Terror and violence come from the interior of the state itself. If we look at the political forces in Iraq now, if we look at the governing parties in Iraq now, we will see that all of them, the Kurdish parties as well as the Shiite political parties, are organized around the so-called militia or paramilitary groups. So the militias are not a security issue. You cannot dissolve the militia and integrate them within the security apparatus of the state, and you get to live them. And you have a new army, new police, etc. The militia are the political form of organization of these parties. And since the new state is nothing but the general parties of the ruling governing class, that means if you dissolve the militias and paramilitary groups in Iraq, you will dissolve these parties, and hence you will dissolve the state. It is not a civil terror from private groups, etc. It is a state affair. It is a state issue. And why? Because the problem is the governing groups and allies and so on in Iraq, they spent the last at least 3 decades outside Iraq. So they don't have any credibility within the Iraqi society. They don't have any social basis within the Iraqi society. See, the only way to create a new social basis for this new state and for this new project of accumulation is through violence. There's a logic behind bombardment of the city and killing people. I call it's a form of governance. It's a form of political order. Terror is not a collateral issue. It is a form of political order. Because the logic behind that, if you remember the Vietnam War, and a very prominent figure at that time, I believe you know him, Samuel Huntington. Samuel Huntington at that time was arguing, if you want to shift the political forces in Vietnam, you have to bomb all the countryside with the peasant relief, because those represent the social basis of the resistance in Vietnam. So you have, you can achieve 2 issues at the same time. You will displace all these peasantries from the countryside to the cities, So they will lose their social basis. And on the other hand, you will control them. You will bring them into the control of the U.S. Army. This is exactly what they were doing in Iraq. By displacing 100,000 of people of different cities in Iraq and bombing all of the cities and so on, they tried to get rid of the resistance on the one hand, on the other hand, to force the people to go to zones where they can control. I mean, the funny thing, if you watch TV, and there's a so-called suicide bomb in one of the streets of Baghdad, and people were killed. So after 2 minutes, they will tell you there was an Sunni attack on a Shiite people. I mean, they didn't check the identity of those people who were killed. But a priori, they are Shiites, and the other Sunni. So what I'm arguing, the notion of Shiite and Sunni is, it has a function here within this discourse. The problem is, there's a conflict over political power within the Shiite political forces, within the state apparatuses, especially within the parliament and outside. A conflict over hegemony. Who would represent the so-called nominally majority of the Shiite people in Iraq? There's a conflict between the governing forces within the parliament, like Al-Hakim, Al-Maliki, and their militias, and outside Al-Sadr and his militia. Thousands of people were killed in this conflict. For the simple reason, what Al-Hakim and Al-Badr and all the Shiite political parties who came in 2003 on this Trojan imperial horse, they realized nominally the south of Iraq is Shiite, but in a political sense, it doesn't represent any majority. So each one of these forces tries to claim to be the representative of Shiite communities in Iraq by killing people. So the notion of sectarian war is nothing but an internal conflict over political power within the governing class, and not between different sects or different ethnic in Iraq. I mean, presenting the argument in this way, of course, it has a strategic background. Because if you present the situation in Iraq in ethnic or cultural or religious category, you know, the only consequence you will say, okay, you shouldn't end the occupation, because then you will have a chaos, etc. But if you put it in the other way, you open up perspective for resistance for different political projects in Iraq. I mean, of course, if you strike something else as if you commit a suicide bombing, because if you do suicide bombing, you're sure everybody will see you in Washington, London, and Toronto, all over the place. But if you struggle on a different level against the occupation, nobody will take notice of your existence. We have an enormous development in Iraq since 2003. And development in many aspects is very promising, because you have a new form of organization, of representation, of articulation of interest on different levels, on the class and gender level. And few of you probably knows about this development in Iraq. The problem they are facing now, this imperial project in Iraq, with the correlation of the interests, created new kind of institutions that represent, if you would like, a regression in the history of Iraq. You know, even Saddam Hussein, until 2003, we had a constitution in Iraq since 1972. It was a compromise between the communists and the left parties at that time. It was a very progressive constitution on the class and gender level. Even Saddam Hussein, until 2003, he didn't dare to dismantle all these social rights within the constitution. What do we have now? The first thing they did, they dismantled all the social rights. There are no social rights. They institutionalized for the first time in the modern history of Iraq the religious institution as part of the constitution and of the constitutional court in Iraq. So that you will have, this is the contradiction within the constitution. You have a kind of Islamic democracy. Islam as a source of law. But people in Baghdad and Basra and all over the place think, what kind of Islam? What do they mean by Islam? Because different Sunni understand different things under Islam, and Shiite too, and you have so many different groups. So who will be the representative of Islam on this constitutional level? The second thing, they fractioned the whole political system in a way that the position of the legislative is very weak. On the other hand, they should strengthen the executive, but only to a point where they can control it. Now we have a big debate in Iraq about the so-called extension or renewing the so-called multinational forces in Iraq. The occupation forces in Iraq. Because the Iraqi government has to, every year in December, they send like a letter to the Security Council to renew these troops in Iraq. For the first time since 4 years, we have now a majority within the Iraqi parliament against the renewing of the occupation troops in Iraq. So I am sure, this is one of the problematics of this American constitution in Iraq, we will have an escalation of the conflict within December and January. Why? Because though for the first time you have a majority within the parliament against the extension or the renewing of the occupation troops, the government can veto this law. And the problem they have in the parliament, you need 2/3 majority to override the veto of the government, which you will never get because they fraction the parliament according to ethnic and religious groups. So that means either way, if the Maliki government will extend one year war, we will have an escalation of the conflict. If it wouldn't dare to extend, because it would commit probably a political suicide, you will have escalation of the conflict from the side of the American troops in Iraq. So the conflict will escalate the next month. But once again, it's not between Shiite and Sunni, it's not between Arab and Kurds, it's not between, Bin Ladenists and Zarqawis and Islamists and all the kind. It is an occupation situation, a Sunni or new colonial situation, and it is a class project. And the whole form of violence and terror is because of this situation. And I believe if you end the occupation, this is the moment where you can say you can pacify the situation in Iraq. That doesn't mean you will have peace the other day. You will have problems, you will have conflict. But I think the Iraqi people can handle these issues. I will stop at this moment and we can discuss the issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.